I have with us Mark TeRuki, who is a former national champion in cycling. Now, I think were you New Zealand national champion, right?
Yeah.
He has lived in Tulsa for a couple of decades. He has a coaching business that's probably a couple decades old, and he's actually my coach. He's amazing. He still races once in a while. He's pretty fit guy, but you know, really he trains professional people who really compete, as well as people who just want to exercise. So I'm happy to have Mark here today to talk to us a little bit about injury in particular. When athletes have season-ending injuries in particular, and surely that happens with cycling, whether that's concussions or somebody just like breaks something and can't race anymore. What is the process you typically see them experience?
Yeah, that's difficult because no one plans for that to happen, right? No one ever thinks a season's going to be brought to an end. You're always thinking the goals you have for yourself, and no one factors in that. So there's definitely there's the emotional toll initially when an athlete realizes this is going to be the end of their season they had so many hopes and dreams for. And that's probably the most important part for me, is addressing that with them. Obviously, whatever the injury is, the medical aspect of it is in the hands of doctors, therapists, things like that. For me as a coach, it's really important to address the emotional side of it for them, and keep some kind of hope that, you know, it's the end of a season. It's not the end of your life. And it's, you know, try to address, you know, you kind of have to reframe everything. What's the long term now that if you've lost this season, even though it's a long way down the road, what can we salvage from it that can make the next season better than maybe if you'd addressed this season's goals that might, you know, sometimes that has effect on next season. So look at that. But it's definitely the emotional side of it is probably the biggest factor for me, and addressing kind of how that's affecting them as a person, as the athlete. I know this has been an area that's grown a lot the last few years, and I'm happy to see that. I don't think that was factored into much when I was racing, but there's a lot of, you know, literature, research being done now on the emotional aspect on an athlete when either season's taken away due to injury, health, or, you know, also when they retire, when you know, a pro athlete decides to retire, the emotional aspect of that. So that's become a big area now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So season-ending injuries, it's like, well, you're going to have more seasons, presumably, right? But do you ever see anyone kind of self-destruct where it's like ends up being the end of their career because they were just so devastated? Or do people usually find a way of getting their head together?
Yeah, what I've personally experienced, I haven't seen that. I know it's happened. I've read the articles. I've read sometimes athletes come out way after retirement and talk about, this is what happened to me. And I think that's valuable for us, because I don't think we always see athletes, and the nature of sport is the athlete themselves. You must have this level of resiliency and I don't know what the word is, but there's a stoicness about being an athlete, I think, that doesn't allow you necessarily to express what's going on inside of you. So I think it's really important to have a support system. You know, it may be family. Even though cycling in particular is an individual sport, none of us do it individually. You know, pros have a team. We have clubs and team members at the local level. Doesn't matter what level. So it's an individual sport, but we have teammates. And yet, when you have an injury and you can't do your sport anymore, that takes you away from your team. You're not training with them. You're not going away to races with them. And so that, for some of us and for pros, that's a big part of what their support structure is. And you're immediately taken away from that. And particularly in cycling, you know, you go back to your home, your team's away racing every weekend, you're not with them. And so I think it's important for people on the outside, because the athlete probably isn't going to reach out. Most of them won't. And so it's important for people on the outside to almost predict they're going to need support. And so it's important for them to reach out to the athlete and say, what do you need? Can I come by? Can I come and see you? You know, whatever it might be. So, yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, that kind of, I think sometimes we might call it grit, or like when you talk about that resilience, but that's sort of like that you need to toughen up attitude, right? And I think that can be really problematic when people don't know the difference between good pain and bad pain when it comes to injury or training. And then also when it gets in the way of seeking social support, getting help if you're feeling depressed. There is the International Olympic Committee actually just came out with a review paper in November and December talking about mental health problems, even in elite athletes at the Olympic level, and that there's just such a high stigma that it's problematic. And, you know, they cited some of my lab's work because we've looked at that with college students, and they're like, nobody is even looking at this with Olympic athletes because it's so stigmatized. So they had to look at the college student, you know, athlete literature. So I think you're right that hasn't changed in, you know, 40 or 50 years, that it's just like can be literally a silent killer, I think.
Yeah, and I think, you know, part of being an athlete is you learn to overcome. So everything that's put in front of you physically, you learn to train harder, be better, overcome. And so that's your whole mindset, is overcoming, getting better, I'll get through this. And then there are some things that happen that you just can't overcome in that process. And that you can't just put your head down and train more. And that's, you know, I mean, let's face it, a lot of athletes, the way you overcome is, I just do more, I train harder, I get better, get up earlier, I eat better. And then something comes along like an injury or an illness, those are taken off the plate. You can't train more, you can't train better to overcome this. And that's the difficulty, I think, is the coping mechanisms athletes typically have are, I'll train more, I'll overcome it myself. I mean, you know, that Michael Jordan Bulls documentary started last night, and that, I mean, it's personified there. Jordan is just like, you know, he is just, and that's the overcoming part of it. But when there's an injury, and therefore you can't train harder, you can't train more, you know, and therefore what are you left with? You know, I don't know how to address it anymore, because how I addressed everything else isn't available to me anymore. So
no, that's helpful. You mentioned retirement, that sometimes that can be the same. So let's talk about retirement. So when you decided to retire, what kind of process did you go through, and what do you think some of the issues are that athletes experience?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of organic. And it wasn't like, I think it's difficult for an athlete, like especially at the pro level, when they're not offered a contract, or there is like a series, especially like things like concussions and things like that, where it's obviously it's taken away from them rather than being their choice. With me, so the last year I had seriously racing, I ended up getting mono. And so that ended my season. And then after the season was done, I started training again. You know, for me, I remember it vividly. I went out for a ride one day and was getting ready to do sort of some hard intervals to get back into it. I was just going to kind of do what I'd always done every other year, get back into it, and I was going to come back to the States again. And halfway through a set of intervals, I was just like, shit, I don't want to do this anymore. And I just turned around and rode home, and I was done. I was like, and I think when I look back on it, you know, I'd been racing over here the year before, or in that year. I had, my goals were to come back to New Zealand and race the Olympic trials, the national trials for, would have been the Seoul Olympics. And so that was taken away from me. Well, taken away from me. You know, that was gone. And in the process when I was racing over here, I saw the guys like the 7-Eleven team that year that went away and competed the Tour de France. I raced in some of the races with them. And I saw the level they were at. And I think there was a realization. I was 26. And I saw that I wasn't sure I could get to their level from where I was at anymore. And so I think the combination of kind of that's what I've been chasing, and getting the mono. I don't know if if I would have had that realization necessarily if I'd been able to complete that season and had some good results, but getting the mono, the season ending, not racing the trials back home, and then starting up, I think it just kind of, I came to a realization that I'm not sure I can get there, and I'm not sure if I can't get there, why I want to do this anymore. So, and what I did, I didn't get on my bike for a long time because what we were talking about earlier, I just quit riding for a long time. I took up other things, other sports and activities, but you know, it was some months later that because for me it was like, if I'm not racing, why am I going to ride a bike kind of thing? And it wasn't until some months later I went out with a buddy of mine for a ride, and I was like, this is fun. I like this. I like riding bikes. And so it was like a process for me. Initially, I didn't, looking back, I didn't handle it well because the fact that I just gave up, I just hung my bike up. But then there was this realization that I actually like riding bikes just for fun. And, that stayed with me, up until this time. That's why people ask me, why don't you race? And it's like, I kind of just enjoy riding bikes. So I don't have to race to get that, even though there's aspects of racing I miss. But yeah, I think so mine was kind of an organic process, I think. I mean, I came to realization myself. For an athlete to have it taken away from them, either, like I say, a team not offering them a contract, cycling is kind of tough because there's never enough spots in the pro peloton for the amount of riders there are trying to be a pro. So, and so if you're not racing at that pro tour level, it's kind of hard to make it at the lower levels. And so I think there's definitely a difficulty with that. And that's, I think guys that do well with that are guys that have other avenues in their life that they've made sure there's something there they can fall back on, and develop another area they can go to. Because some guys do it really well. They just seamlessly transition. But yeah, definitely the most difficult thing is if taken, the athlete perceived it's taken away from them versus it was their choice.
That sense of control.
Yeah.
So in my class, I have some seniors who've kind of had their seasons taken away from them, and they're in difficult positions, right? Because the NCAA has said, okay, you can stay eligible, but if you're about to graduate, you've taken all of your credits, it could cost extra money to prolong school just to have that last season. They're making really tough decisions right now and essentially forced to retire before they wanted to. In terms of coping with that, what kind of advice do you have?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
No,
having a support system, having people that can help guide them to, I mean, depending on what they, some of them are possibly still looking to get drafted or going on to the next level in their sport. Others who weren't necessarily doing that, all of a sudden they're looking at what's my next step. So hopefully, a support system is really important, and a plan, work from a plan rather than just being like happenstance.
Right.
And then, I don't know. I've never played collegiate athletics, but I would hope that within the college environment, within the team environment, there is some support within that environment, coaches, people in the facility that can help with talking it out, talking it through, therapy, things, those sorts of things to help them with that process. Because I think the biggest thing was it's just so sudden. It happened all of a sudden. It was for us, and it was that talk about control. They have no control over this in terms of it just happened. So yeah,
absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said for that idea of you need to set new goals so that you can.
What's been interesting for me, Lisa, from the coaching aspect is people the value of the process versus race goals, whereas people that are more process oriented, they're training for races, but they love the process of training, riding, whatever it might be. The more multifaceted riding is in people's lives, they've continued to ride. I mean, it's like, you take away Tulsa Tough, it didn't, it mattered, but it didn't change their motivation to get out to ride. For some of them, it's just help me, at least get me outdoors and ride my bike for an hour or so, during the day. So I think that's been something that's been interesting to me through this is people that are solely race result oriented. This has been hard for them. Those that are into the process, that enjoy riding for multiple reasons, this hasn't been a big change for them.
Cool. Well, I'm going to end it there, Mark. Thank you so much for checking in with my class, and it's good to see you.
You too, Linda. And wishing, hope it goes well with the class and wishing them the best.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. I'll see you on the trails.
Right. Bye.
Okay. Bye.